All right, we're going to look at some of the hand tools that you will see in the shop, as well as you might see in the architecture and construction career cluster. Some of these might not pertain exactly to cabinet making, but you would see them in other trades in the career cluster. So as we begin, we're going to first take a look at our PPE, and PPE stands for Personal Protective Equipment. And there's a few things that we need to be aware of in the shop environment. The first is our approved eye protection. Now you'll be given one pair of safety glasses for the shop. If you ruin them or damage them, then subsequent pairs you're going to have to purchase on your own. Safety glasses could also be worn, and they add a little added protection because you have this encased around your face where it's not going to get dust particles blowing by like you might around here. Fine powdery dust might get in there. The face shield is also going to help protect us, typically in addition to your safety glasses. So you would wear safety glasses or goggles, and then let's say you're working on the wood lathe and you've got these chunks kind of flying off, then you would maybe put a face shield on to help protect your face from getting hit by that debris. Next, we're going to have our hearing protection. We have two different kinds you should be familiar with. The first is our earplugs here. They're kind of foam. You roll them between your fingers and shove them in your ear canal, and those are going to expand open and kind of have some pressure in your ear canal. The other style would be ear muffs. Ear muffs go over your head, kind of like a headphone, and they block out the hearing or the noise that way. Now you're going to want, if you want to use this style, you're going to want to bring your own pair in. Because we don't want to transfer these from person to person as they're going to be wearing these on their head. We don't want to share them with each other. Most of the time, most personal protective equipment is that it's personal and you don't want to share it. The next thing we have is a dust mask. A dust mask is going to help filter out some of the dust in the air. If you're sanding or working on the wood lathe and you have a lot of fine powdery dust from that operation, a dust mask is going to help. But don't get it confused with a respirator. A respirator actually has filters that mount onto the front of it that are typically used to filter the air from any chemicals or hazardous materials you might be working with. And there are different filters depending on the application you are doing. So we have a respirator and a dust mask. Two different kinds of earplugs, the ear plugs and the ear muffs. We have safety goggles, a face shield, and safety glasses. So there's some safety equipment that we're going to be using while we use the machines. We have what's called a 4-inch margin of safety here in the shop, and that means we're going to keep any toes, fingers, arms, any body part at least 4 inches away from any moving bits, blades, knives, or pinch points. And so these safety equipment are going to help keep our hands a safe distance away as we are pushing materials through the machine or cutter head. And so the first here is a push stick, and this is used a lot on the table saw to push your material past the blade. This gives you some additional height so that your hand is well above the blade while you're pushing it past. So this would be on the notch or on the back edge of your board, and this would be up in the air with your hand on it, pushing that through and guiding your cut. The other ones we have here are push blocks. The push block is typically used just to put downward force on a workpiece as it's maybe going through like the router table or maybe even the dado blade. And the thing with that is there's not a lot of grip on the bottom. There's a little bit of a rubbery pad, but there's nothing to really grab and push your material through. It's more of a downward force. So this one over here, the push shoe, is kind of a combination of the both. It's got this notch on the back here that catches on the back side of your wood, and then this longer front side that will put downward pressure. So as you're pushing through, you've got force down on the top surface, and this back notch is pulling your workpiece through. So a push shoe, a push stick, and a push block are some of the safety equipment you should be familiar with. So we have some measuring and layout tools we're going to take a look at. And so one of our most common measuring tools is going to be our tape measure or measuring tape, however you want to say that. Either way is fine. And we use this on a daily basis for taking measurements and determining sizes. The next tool here is a compass. So this is like you would find in drawing or art class or maybe a math class to lay out radiuses. Not a north, south, east, west type compass, but for drawing is what we're talking about. The next here is a level. This one is a torpedo level. It's a smaller level. It's about 12 inches long. And we really will not be using a level very much in the shop. The problem we have with building our projects is we're building them in a shop where the floors all slope towards the floor drain. So with that, the tables sit on the floor. You build the project on the table. And so we know that the floors aren't level, so the table's not level, so your project's not going to be level on the table. When we're building projects, we're mostly measuring and then checking for squareness. So the level is really ideal when you're installing the cabinets. When you're mounting them to the wall, you want to make sure that they're level with the horizon. And so that's where the level will come in for installing cabinets. And then lastly, we have our pencil. Just a regular pencil for writing on wood is best. We don't need an eraser because most of the time if you write on wood with a pencil, you're going to need to sand that off before the finishing process. So if you try to erase it with a rubber eraser, it's going to just leave rubber residue all over the wood anyways. So sanding is really the easiest way to get pencil off. So you don't have to have an eraser when you do that. This one's more of a carpenter's pencil. It's not round, so it's not going to roll off the table on you if you set it down while working. So we talked about square. What does square mean? Usually when we talk about something being square, it's either true or 90 degrees. And so what we're doing to check that is we're going to be using a variety of tools that are called squares. This square, if you look down at here, has two sides and it makes a 90-degree angle up here in the corner. So this square, it's called a speed square. You can see right here. The speed square is a very short kind of square. It's about 7 inches long. It's nice and durable. If you drop it, things like that, it's not going to bend. And one nice thing about it is it can fit in your tool pouch or in a pocket pretty easily. The speed square, I've also heard it named the rafter angle square. And you can use this point up here, this little indent, to lay out a variety of different angles that you might be working when building rooftops or things like that. So that's where that name comes from. But in here, just know it is a speed square and you'll be all set. Next, we're going to take a look at is our framing square. Framing square is a little bit bigger. So this is a 24-inch long side, and this is a 16-inch long side over here. So it's 24 by 16, gives us a nice big surface area if we're checking larger surfaces of a project. The problem with these is they're a little bit thinner. They're going to bend a little bit easier. They're not quite as thick and bulky as the speed square is. Next, we're going to take a look at this little one here. This little guy is called a tri-square. This could be metal or wood on it, and you might even see the blades that have some numbering on there. But this square works well to just draw 90 degrees on wood, very easily clips on to the edge of a board, and then allows you to draw your markings. The speed square also has that option. It's got this lip on here all the way down where you'd butt it up to your board very quickly and be able to draw your straight edges with that lip. And as we use this in class, you'll understand what I mean by it's very quick to set up there and get your lines drawn. Lastly, we're going to take a look here. This one here is called a combination square. The combination square has accessories that can go with it for laying out all kinds of different shapes and figuring out different angles. This one, for the most part, this is what you would see in here is just a regular combination square. This slides up and down the ruler. So you loosen this little thumb screw, you can move it all the way down to this end, and then you have a flat edge with a long blade. Or you could move it all the way down to this edge, and you would have a nice 45-degree checker, and you could see where, with that long blade checking 45-degree angles. It comes in handy for a few different tasks. One nice thing is you could set this at a certain size and then run it up and down your board and make marks at certain measurements. And with your board running against that edge, that blade is always going to be in the same spot. So it's very easy to go through and make marks, repeated marks over and over along a board or project. So next, we're going to take a look at some of our measuring tools, or a few more of our measuring tools. This one here is called a dial caliper. Now, the dial caliper has this dial on the face that allows you to read the reading. This is more of an analog type caliper. We also have an outside caliper and an inside caliper. We use these a lot on the lathe when we're trying to duplicate things or measure one surface and then transfer it to another. And so these work really nice. They've got this locking mechanism on there. So you can pull a measurement or pull a size, and then you can transfer it to other things without having to worry about it moving. Now, if you want to take a measurement off this, you would set it to your size, and you would actually have to pull a tape measure between your span and read it that way. Where the dial caliper has the measurement already on it when you're reading. But the jaws aren't as big, so you can't get into as big of openings. The other one we have is a digital caliper, just like the dial caliper, but it does have a digital display. This one could be locked with this little knob on top to lock it at a certain position for transferring or checking different sizes. If you want to make sure two pieces are the same, you could lock that as you walk from one to the other. So those are our calipers, another measuring tool that we have. Next, we're going to look at our striking tools. This is first ones are the hammers. So there's two hammers you should be familiar with in here. One is got more of a sharp curve to it. Typically this one here, it's known as a this one here is known as a finishing or a claw hammer. Now the finishing or claw hammer is typically 16 ounces and below, and typically that weight refers to the weight of the head. So 16 ounces or below would be a finishing or claw hammer. Now when we look at this bigger hammer, this is going to be in that 18 ounces and above range. So, 18, 20, 25, 26, whatever ounces you can find is your max size depending on the brand. So that is a framing or ripping hammer. And again, 18 ounces and above. Now the thing with the hammers are, the bigger the hammer, the more energy it takes to swing that. And you're going to use this for driving in those big spikes, the coated sinkers, things like that when you're building or framing a house. And so that is where you need the bigger weight to drive those big fasteners in. Now, when we talk about the finishing hammer or the ripping hammer or framing hammer, you notice the claws are a little different. Some carpenters will actually put a little sharpened edge on the claw, and you could use that for splitting wood. If you need a board, a scrap piece, and you need it to be a little bit smaller, you could use that as kind of like a chisel or a pick there and split a piece of wood with the grain. Some people will also like this straight claw because it gives you more leverage when pulling out nails, because this angle is greater than this angle. So your handle would be a lot closer to the surface. So you'd have to pull and have a lot more force. This one's got more leverage on the nail for pulling out big, long, heavy-duty nails. Some other things people look at with hammers is going to be their face. Now, the face really does not determine the hammer. You can get the waffle face or a smooth face in the same hammer, okay? What really determines a hammer is the weight of the hammer. So this smooth face, maybe that's your preference. The waffle face works nice with some of those coated sinkers. They have kind of a waffle pattern on them, and when the two meet, they get traction and grip each other, so your hammer isn't kind of sliding off the surface of the nail. Some of the higher end hammer brands, you can actually unscrew the face and put a different face on if you want. So you can swap them out depending on the application that you're doing. So we're going to look at our nail sets next. We have 3 nail sets. They usually come in a pack of 3 if you buy them as a kit. And there are 3 different tips that you usually get: a small, medium, and large. This smaller one would be obviously for your smaller nailing or nails or fasteners. But if you take this small one to the top of a finishing nail, this should fit right in the top. Usually there's a little dimple on some nails that would fit on. So this small one would be for small nails. This one, maybe a nail would fit right around the ring. And this one might even fit over top of a nail head, and this inner surface is going to push it down. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Here we've got 2 applications, one where we got a smaller finish nail, and that's going to fit right on there. And then this would be used to sink that nail head below the surface. If we tried to hammer this below the surface, we would hit the wood with our hammer and damage the surface. Here's a bigger nail, maybe that medium or large size punch sitting right on top of the nail head there. So those would be 2 applications to use with the nail set when we're setting nails below the surface. So mallets, another striking tool that we have. 2 mallets that we're going to see in here. The first one is a rubber mallet. The rubber mallet really is a piece of rubber attached to a handle. So that's where it gets its name. The next one, this one is called a dead blow mallet. Now this dead blow mallet has a little bit different features with it. And the first thing we're going to notice is that if you shake it, it actually sounds like a maraca. So let's listen to that again. So we get that maraca sound. Also, a big difference with these is this black rubber surface is going to be like a shoe on the gym floor. So if you strike a project and maybe you're just trying to disassemble it or assemble it, and you just strike it with this, you could potentially leave a black shoe mark type on the workpiece. It's going to be a little bit more challenging to get off. This one here, I've seen them advertised as non-marking. Now there are some cheaper lower end ones that are black or dark color that could still mark. But these ones that are neon color, neon green, yellow, or orange, typically are non-marking. So it's like, it's not gonna leave that black or marking on your wood that you're gonna have to sand off later. So let's look at the main difference between the 2. The rubber mallet, when you strike something, not all of the energy is going to go into what you strike. Some of the energy is going to go back into the rubber and actually cause it to bounce back. The dead blow mallet, where we heard that shaking sound, there's BBs or sand in there, depending on the manufacturer. And when that drives forward, it carries all your momentum forward so it doesn't bounce back. So let's take a look at that here. So you can see that bouncing of that rubber mallet. The dead blow mallet just has a nice, firm strike. So let's look at some of our saws. We have a few of our hand saws we're going to look at. This one here typically is known as a hand saw. It's a triangular shaped saw blade. The surfaces of the saw are not parallel with each other. You can get this in a variety of tooth patterns, from big teeth to little teeth, depending on your application and what you're doing. The next saw here is called a cope saw. And if you look at the cope saw, you've got this really tiny, thin blade. So these blades are pretty fragile, but they're pretty inexpensive. So when you break this, you typically have to just replace the blade. Now this frame stays intact, but the downfall is we can't cut things that are very deep. This is about 6 inches from here to the blade. And so as you're cutting, you're limited in the depth that you can cut. But this blade, being so small, makes it easy to cut irregular shapes, like radiuses or curves in a project. The next one you might see is called a jab saw or a keyhole saw. And this is used a lot for drywall. So if you're hanging cabinets and you got to do some modification in the drywall for whatever reason, this is the type of saw you would use. Big teeth, serrated teeth to get through that drywall real fast and easy. The next one is called a hacksaw. The hacksaw is going to be the only one in the shop that we would use for metal. All other saws are pretty much wood saws. So if you were to take this keyhole saw and start cutting metal, you're going to damage the teeth. You're probably going to make it so that this saw is no longer any good and it has to be thrown away. Now the cope saw and the hacksaw's blades could both be changed out, but these other two saws have permanent blades, and if you damage them, they're just going to have to be trashed. Okay, so those are 4 saws. We have the hacksaw for metal, keyhole or jab saw, which you would use on sheetrock, drywall, cope saw. We'll talk more about that in class and making cope joints. And then the hand saw is going to be more for your straight, longer type cuts. Another saw that we need to be familiar with in here is called the back saw. Now, if we take a look at this, the 2 edges of the saw are parallel to each other. So the teeth down here and the back of the saw is typically parallel. We can't have a very big cut, only probably about 4 to 5 inches, because this metal strip is in the way. So when we look at this saw and we see this metal strip on the back, that indicates to us that this is a back saw. The back saw is typically used in combination with the miter box. A miter box holds the saw upright so you can cut a variety of different angles. Could be 90 degrees, could be 22.5, could be 45, whatever it is. And so the saw fits in the miter box. You would put your board under there where you want to cut it, and you would make the cuts. So the miter box and the back saw usually go together, but you could use the back saw for cutting other things if needed. So here's some other cutters or tools that will do cutting. First, we have our wood chisels. Now, there are different kinds of chisels. There are chisels for doing masonry or concrete work. There are chisels for the wood lathe. There's chisels for carving. But these specific ones are wood chisels, and they're typically identified very easily by looking at them. And you notice that the bottom is very flat. And then the top surface has this back angle on it. So these are very sharp, okay, very sharp. Like if you were to take a piece of paper to this, that hopefully it would slice the paper because it's that sharp. Now what you would use this for is removing thin pieces of wood. You could use this to scrape the wood and hopefully get a nice peeled off layer. So if these get dropped or damaged, then this edge isn't very good and it's not going to do its job as well. These are not paint can openers. These are not screwdrivers. These are not pry bars. We want to use them for cutting wood so the tip is nice when we're ready to use it. The next tool is going to be our utility knife. Now the utility knife has many purposes in here. You could use it as a marking tool. Maybe you're laying out stuff. You could use that to mark your sizes. We could cut sandpaper. We could cut tape, all kinds of different things with it. The utility knife usually has a blade that's trapezoid shaped, so it has an angle up. It would go flat, and then on this side, it would angle down and back over. So it's bigger on bottom than top. What's nice about this is you have a good sharp edge out here. If you cut on something and get this dull, you undo the screw and you turn the blade around and tighten it back up, and you've got a brand new blade. The blade has 2 cutting surfaces on it. Now, don't get this confused with a box cutter. A box cutter is going to have a little bit different shape. It's going to be nice and thin, and you usually push out on the backside, and it holds a square razor blade rather than one of those trapezoid-looking razor blades. So a square razor blade, again, this could be flipped around and turned around, but this would be the box cutter. A thin piece of metal pushes out the end to cut boxes. This is our utility knife, so don't get the 2 confused. Next, we have some cutting tools that would be used to shave or rub on metal or wood to get them down. The first is going to be a file. That's at the bottom here. The file is going to be used for metal, so maybe you have a screw that has a little burr on it. You could use that to file off. Maybe you got a hard piece of glue. You could use the file for that, although it may clog up the pores on that. We also have a rasp. So a rasp would have a handle like this on the end. The rasp has bigger teeth, and it's going to be used to kind of eat away at woods quickly. So the rasp is more for wood, and the file is going to be more for the metal type projects. Now, if we take a closer look, you can see the rasp here has these a lot bigger teeth that are going to shave off that wood. The file has a little bit smaller teeth, and it's going to be a little bit easier and more cuts on that metal. So the file's for metal, the rasp is for wood. So we have, again, the wood chisels, flat on bottom, angle on top. We have a utility knife, we have a rasp, and a file. So we're going to look at some of our wrenches. So this wrench is the one you might see at home in your toolbox. This is called a combination wrench, and it's a combination wrench because it has an open end and it has a box end. So two different styles of wrenches, a box end wrench, a combination wrench. Because it has two different ends, it's combination wrench. Okay, open end, box end. You can get this same wrench with the box end on both ends or an open end on both ends, but because there's two different ones, it's a combination. Next, we're going to look at, this is called our adjustable wrench. It usually has a little thumb screw here to make the grip bigger or smaller. Now, some of you may look at that and be like, well, we don't call that an adjustable wrench at home. We call that maybe a crescent wrench. Well, if we take a look at this tool here, we'll see that this is a Crescent brand tool, and it doesn't look like that last one. So you need to know in this class that tools have sometimes a common name they're known by and a technical name, which is their real name. So Crescent would not be the name of this tool, but it would be the name, its known name. So Crescent wrench would not be correct answer for in here. We're going to call this an adjustable wrench. But I don't want you to lose sleep about this, but I need you to know that with this class comes technical terms and names that we need to be familiar with. The next one is hex key. This is an L shape. This end of the key is longer than this side. Six-sided key there. Now, you may look at that and be like, we don't call that a hex key. We call that an Allen wrench. Well, again, just like the other tool, this is one of our adjustable wrenches again, and this is Allen brand. So Allen is a brand, probably the first one to make the hex key. Crescent was probably the first one to make the adjustable wrench, and that's where they get their coin names or their common names that you may heard them referred to as before. Let's take a look at some of our pliers. So the first one we're going to look at here is called a side cutting or diagonal pliers. Some people in industry might refer to this as a dikes, shorten up the diagonal and just call it a dikes. So a diagonal cutting pliers or a side cutting pliers. Now, if you said wire cutters, these are going to be more of your wire cutters. This is going to cut a bigger wire or cable. This is going to be stripping different sizes of wires or crimping different ends onto the wire. So these would be more of your wire cutters. This is going to be your side cutters. This next one is called a linesman pliers. It's got a short stubby front nose. Down here in the middle, you can see there's a little cutter. You could maybe snip some small wire, twist on different fasteners, things like that, wire nuts onto the wire. This is a lineman's pliers. This next one, pretty self-identifying. Long nose or a needle nose pliers, whichever you would like to call that. I believe on the identification test, you need to know it as a long nose pliers, but if you know long nose, needle nose are interchangeable, you'll be okay. So a couple more pliers to look at. The first one here is called a groove joint pliers. Now the groove joint pliers has these series of grooves down the side, and this jaw could be open really big or really small, fitting into these different grooves. And then you have a long handle for lots of leverage on those grippers. Now, this is another tool that has a common name. And maybe you're like, well, at home we have those and we don't call them a groove joint pliers. Well, they're also maybe referred to as a channel locks. Now, channel locks, again, this is our adjustable wrench here in the channel locks brand. So channel locks is not a certain type of wrench, it's a brand. So this one does happen to be channel locks, even though it is a groove joint pliers, okay? Again, know the technical name. If you want to call it its common name after the class, that's fine by me, no big deal. But in class, you should know its technical name. This one here is our locking pliers. And again, maybe you've seen this or heard it called something else. Maybe you've heard it referred to as a vice grip. Again, our adjustable wrench here in the vice grip brand of tools. So this vice grip is a brand. This tool is a locking pliers. And lastly, we have your common pliers that maybe you've seen at home in your junk drawer or in your toolbox. It slips between two different sizes. This is a slip joint pliers. The slip joint pliers slips between a large and a small size to either grab big or small things. So slip joint pliers, locking pliers, and our groove joint pliers. So we have a few drivers we need to take a look at. The first screwdriver we're going to look at here has the plus or an X shape on the tip of it here. This is called our Phillips screwdriver, and it's going to have a pattern that would either make a plus or an X depending on how you look at it. The next one here is a flat-headed screwdriver. You can kind of see its flat shape here. So a flathead, regular, or standard screwdriver. Three names it could be known by. If someone says, go grab me a regular screwdriver, or a standard screwdriver, or a flathead screwdriver, those would all be the same tool. Next one here, a little bit hard to see, but there are four sides to this. It is just a square. So this would be our square head driver. Okay, and it's going to have a shape like this, fitting into that and locking in nice. This one is a little bit nicer than the other two. The tool really stays kind of locked into this square and doesn't pop out as much as it does on a Phillips or a regular screw head. The last one you should be familiar with here and at least know is the torque shape. So the torque shape is a six-sided starburst here that really has a lot of surface area for the driver and screw to have contact with, and so it doesn't strip out quite as much as the Phillips or the regular one. So those are our drivers. Let's take a look at some of our clamps. So we have some clamps that would be smaller, maybe a one or two hand operation. The first one here is our wooden twist clamp or hand screw clamp. And if you remember from us talking in class and using these, or when we do use them, the jaws of this clamp need to be parallel with each other. If they're not parallel, they don't have the grip that they need to. And so if you're using this to clamp your workpiece to the table, it's going to vibrate loose really easy if these jaws are not parallel. So hand screw clamp or wooden twist clamp. The next one here is what we call a face frame clamp. It's got this locking pliers handle. It's got these two pads on the end. And what we use this for is face frames. And the face frame is going to be like this. And so we're using this clamp to keep these two surfaces nice and flush as we put them together. So the face frame clamp is holding the face frame together as we assemble it. The next one we're going to take a look at is our C clamp. The C clamp gets its name because it looks like the letter C, and it has this threaded post here in the center with a clamp pad on the end, and you would just tighten this up and it would put pressure against your workpiece and the other jaw here. Now we are limited on how far in we can clamp on a project based on the distance between the clamping pad and the frame here. So that distance is usually only a couple inches, so we're not able to get a good reach into our project like we can with the other two clamps. The last clamp we're going to take a look at is our spring clamp. The spring clamp is operated with one hand or two, I guess, if you need to grab and open that up. There's a spring inside here, and so you're limited on how much holding power you have based on that spring. These other clamps all are tightened up and can be locked into a position. The spring clamp only has that spring, so if your project has greater force than the spring inside, the spring clamp is not going to hold so well. So the spring clamp is really used for small, intricate work, where these other clamps are for a little bit more heavy-duty work. We have some longer clamps that we're going to take a look at, and those are going to be things like our trigger clamp. The trigger clamp, if you look at the handle, has a handle that you squeeze like a trigger, and then it's got a small little trigger to release. Now this can only get hand tight by how hard you squeeze it, and sometimes what happens is there's a little bit of slippage as that tightens up. So these are good for mock-up or gluing small projects together, but really for larger projects, this would not be the clamp of choice. If we were going to use this, we could turn it around. One of these jaws will turn around down here, and we could use this tool as a spreader. So maybe you have a little frame that you've already built and you need to add something and you need just a little bit more clearance to get that board in. You could turn this around and use it as a spreader to spread the things apart and then get your board in there. And then the jaws come off and they turn back around and they can be used as a clamp again. This one here is a bar clamp, and if you look at it, it's got this I-beam style of bar. It's nice and rigid. As you clamp things super tight in here, this bar is going to keep its strength. This bar is going to stay nice and tight to whatever you're clamping. That's your bar clamp. The next one is the pipe clamp. This is just a round, hollow pipe, a steel pipe that you would maybe see for water or gas lines. Now, the problem with this is it's hollow, so it's going to be flexible. So if you put things here in the clamp and tighten this thing up, this pipe is going to bend or flex. So it has its appropriate applications. You can make small clamps. You can make big clamps with this. These ends come off. And you could take a small 12-inch piece of pipe and make a little clamp for whatever you wanted. And then you could take, two 10-foot sections of pipe and use a coupler in the middle, and you could make a 20-foot long clamp. So they're a little bit more universal, but they do have some flex. When you tighten things, this pipe is going to bend a little bit. We have a few other tools that we need to be familiar with in the kind of the hand tools category. The first is going to be our glue scraper. This is just like a household paint scraper you'd find at a hardware store. We use this to scrape the glue off. When we glue things together, a lot of times there's beads of glue that are left, and those beads of glue dry super hard. And if they get run through the machines, and the saw blade or the cutter hits them, it could actually damage the carbide tooth. And so we have to scrape off any excess glue before we run them through our machine. So that's what we use the scraper for. These next two we won't use a lot in here, but they are part of the history of cabinet making, and you'd see them in construction industries. This would be a hand plane. This rides along your wood surface, and you would be able to shave off little pieces of wood as you go along. There's several different types of hand planes out there. They each have their own name and do specific things, but just know that shape is a hand plane. The next one we're going to look at is called a sawhorse. Now, a sawhorse is going to be a device that we use to kind of support our material or projects as we're building. So we can put them together, maybe hold a cabinet, or maybe make a table to work on. Things like that nature is what a sawhorse would be used for. Typically, they're used in at least a pair. You don't usually use just one at a time, usually two or more. And that concludes our hand tools section or review. If you have any questions, please talk to your instructor.